Weird tales told by a Dubliner. By Turlough Conmee. Story number 4. A cold start on the source of the Liffey. I was just back living in Dublin after an absence of several years in Canada. I found myself downtown, walking out of Westmoreland Street and onto O'Connell Bridge. It was evening after a long day's work in the city for the thousands of commuters. Time to go home. Crowds of people were pouring out of the office buildings and hurrying to and fro. Nothing unusual about that. But I felt that something was different. People seemed to be wearing an expression approaching panic on their faces, like a herd of stampeding cattle. There wasn't just a spring in their step either. They looked like they were doing their best not to break into a run. I didn't know why this should be so, but I couldn't help being caught up in this general feeling of tension and nervousness. I had to find out what was going on. Luckily, I met an old friend and work colleague, Marcus O'Brien, on O'Connell Bridge. He was the IT manager for Nevada Electronics in Dublin. I asked him what was going on. He replied, "Do you not know? It's the cold start." "Cold start?" says I, puzzled. "Aye," he said impatiently, "the cold start." "What is the cold start?" I asked. At times like that, I feel at a disadvantage because I don't have a TV and I don't read the papers. I prefer not to know what's going on in the world, all the idiocies of politicians and celebrities. But sometimes I miss out on something big, like now. There is, I admit, a price to be paid for not staying ahead of events. "You know what a cold start is, don't you?" he asked, doubtfully. "Aye," I said. "I remember it well from the days of mainframes, before we had PCs. The whole mainframe would be shut down, the remote terminals would be unusable, the modems went dead, the screens went blank, and whatever was in the system would be lost if you hadn't saved it in long-term memory. They used to do that every so often as part of computer maintenance." "Well, that's still what it is," he said, more patiently now. "Just it's a lot bigger." "How big is it? What's involved?" I asked. "Every bloody thing. Now, you obviously haven't heard. There's been a decree from the government to deal with the problem of information overload. You know what that is, don't you?" "Aye," I said. "That's a problem that we all have these days, right? There's so much information going around and we don't have time to absorb it or stay ahead of it, much less remember it all. Life used to be simpler before, but now, of course, we can't go back." "Well, that's just it," said Marcus. "And it's got to be a problem not just for individuals, but for the whole bloody society. There's just too much information needing to be processed. People are completely overloaded, stressed out, because they know they can't control this huge volume of data, no matter how hard they try. The economy can't deal with it either. So, since all information is now digital, not physical, like it used to be in books, government and industry have decided to put an expiry date on information, like they do on food items in the supermarket. Every 10 or 20 years, there's going to be a cold start. The first one is tonight. That means all the human memory will be ditched, cancelled, erased. All the hard disks on all the computers will be wiped clean. Now that has legal consequences, you may be sure. Nothing is valid anymore. Everything has to be renegotiated." "Everything?" I gasped. "Everything," says he with an emphatic nod. "In the first instance, knowledge. All old knowledge becomes obsolete, as we now know. we have to forget it. Constant progress in science and technology means we really have no choice. But there's more than knowledge that gets obsolete. Contracts, loans, laws and regulations, memberships of professions, and the list goes on. Well, all that stuff is going out the window tonight. Jesus. What about personal relationships? That too. Tomorrow you'll have no friends left. You'll have to befriend them again. Social media will start from scratch. Nobody will know anybody else. People you know today will just walk past you tomorrow and not say a word. Good God. What about marriage? What about me wife? That's all finished too, I'm afraid. Marriages today only last a few years anyway. You'll be back to your carefree bachelor days, he said with a laugh. It'll be time to start cruising the bars and finding a new woman. The kind of people needed in today's economy are people who are able to adapt to an unlimited extent. But you, me old friend, you won't give up on me. You won't look the other way next time you see me, will you? I must have looked alarmed. He put his hand on my shoulder. Who knows, he said. Well, anyway, now you're up to date on all of this. Look, I've been appointed Mr. Cold Start for Nevada Electronics, so I've been working on this for a while. I've been networking with a range of companies and government departments on the issue, so I can tell you all about it, if you're interested. And you should be, because it affects you. It affects everybody. I'll be going around various offices tonight to monitor the last-ditch efforts and liaise with other Cold Start task force managers. You can tag along if you feel like it. We'll look at a few places tonight and I'll explain to you what's going on. Begod, that'd be great, Marcus, I said. You see, he added, people are getting off work now to go home or go out and get some dinner. Then they'll be back at their offices tonight for what they're calling the graveyard shift. It's a last chance for them to tie up loose ends and finish up bits of business before the roof caves in. He laughed at this. Come on and we'll grab a bite ourselves somewhere. Then we can begin our grand tour before the end of the world as we know it. He laughed again. So we went for a couple of pints and some pub grub over in Temple Bar. As we tucked in, Marcus told me a bit more about his own involvement in getting Nevada Electronics ready for the Cold Start. We didn't get much notice, he said ruefully. This information overload decree was just sprung on us a month ago. All the governments were in on it. There's no escape. Since then, we've been scrambling to prepare for the shutdown so that Nevada Electronics can survive as a company. Just before 7 o'clock in the evening, me and Marcus began our tour of inspection. We went together around various offices and businesses where people were grappling with the coming Cold Start. People were all staring grimly at the screens in front of them. No time for office banter or smoke breaks. They were essentially trying to get business done and work completed before the shutdown, which, Marcus had told me, was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the morning. The immediate issue was current information, as Marcus told me after he'd checked in with a couple of managers in the large office we were in. He said, information just accumulates exponentially. We can never keep it all in mind, or even navigate it. We have to resign ourselves to letting it all go. You know about hoarding, he said. People who get that they can't throw anything out and can't even get across the living room, let alone get in and out the hall door. There's so much stuff lying around. With information overload, we're like hoarders in a house full of stacks of old newspapers we'll never get around to reading. So we have to wipe the slate clean. Chuck it all out in a skip. It's tough, but it's got to be done. And, you see, he went on, There's another issue we're only beginning to talk about. The electricity. Computers, to store all this data, need more and more electricity. We can't keep producing it. Power sources are finite. So we have to learn to remain within bounds. Computers and networks can't grow exponentially, so information can't either. It's impossible. It doesn't add up. The next place Marcus took me to was some sort of a research institute or a think tank. He told me they were doing research in economic and social issues. Here the atmosphere was hushed, the lights turned down except for the flickering screens, and people seemed to communicate, when at all, in whispers. Here we're dealing with accumulated knowledge, Marcus told me gravely. It's a step up from the level of information. At this level, they're finding rules that can be extrapolated from the information. It's not stuff you process now and use tomorrow. This is stuff that can guide us for years to come. But it has its limits. All knowledge is doomed to become obsolete. Think of what you learned at school. Then it was vital or meaningful or necessary to be able to earn a living, or whatever the teachers told you. But it came with a timestamp. Now it's just a lot of old shite. I mean, what do you still use that you learned at school? Bugger all, right? I nodded sorrowfully. It always was that way, Marcus went on. There has always been a retreat from conquered peaks. Always a time when people shook their heads and said, there we were barking up the wrong tree. Or maybe we were barking up the right tree, but other trees are starting to matter more. We need to forget that and do something else. Think, Marcus went on, not even of forgotten theories of the past, but major frameworks of scientific inquiry, like the phlogiston theory, or classical physics, or phrenology. God, think way back to the Tower of Babel. From one day to the next, they were just overwhelmed with the way the project had mushroomed. They were in over their heads. They gave up and fled into the jungle, never to return. Now we're voluntarily pulling the plug ourselves, but we're staying. After that, we dropped in on the National Library over in Kildare Street. It seemed a haven of peace and quiet. The books were a massive mute presence all around the rotunda. But there was a hurried nervousness in the way scholars were reading through selected tomes and making notes. And here and there in corners, behind desks, I saw the sickly glow and flicker at terminals. God knows what the staff were doing. Marcus looked around the rotunda and gave a deep sigh. Then turning to me, he said, yeah, the books are staying. Mind you, there is a skip out the back where they chuck out books nobody needs anymore. They don't talk much about that. And the books will have to be recatalogued from scratch, since catalogues are online only now. But the cold start doesn't count for too much else here. There'll be no burning the libraries to the ground. There's no need. The knowledge in books is obsolete anyway. It's gathered in dust. Soon people won't read books anymore. Because you can't really interact with a book. You can only turn the pages. You can't search it for keywords, except if it has a good index, and it won't compute results for you. It won't select the information you want and spit it out the other end somewhere. You know what libraries are? Said Marcus, clearly warming to the subject and glad to have an audience. They're the cemeteries of knowledge. Look at them books on the shelves all around. Each in his narrow cell forever laid, sleeping the sleep of the just, until someone chances to wake them up and asks them to tell what they know. No one will bother now. No one has time. Libraries are now going to be like parks, oases of quiet in the city, as old cemeteries tend to become. You can go for quiet walks there, sit on a bench, think of the transience of it all. You get the picture. His voice was getting loud, so I was glad when he looked at his watch and signalled it was time to go. The next issue to be considered, Marcus told me as we entered the data centre of a bank, is debt. Today there's an endless cycle of debt and payment. We all have payables and receivables. The trick is to reconcile them. Getting in your receivables so you can meet your payables. They eventually cancel each other out. It's just a question of time. Everybody owes money to everybody else. It's an economy where the producers and creators consume each other's products and services. It's like the snake with its tail in its mouth. You get me? So it makes sense every few years just to wipe the slate clean. Hollow eyes were raised furtively from glimmering screens as we walked through the rows of desks. An anxious-looking young manager with horn-rimmed glasses and a creased grey suit walked up to us and shook hands with Marcus. He looked like a man about to be shot, shaking hands with the army chaplain before he's led before the firing squad. They conferred in hushed tones for a while. Questions were asked and answered. Every so often, the young manager would look up and gesture helplessly across the sea of desks and computers around us, as if to say there'd never be enough time. Finally, he nodded resignedly, and Marcus patted him on the shoulder. The young man disappeared into a glass-walled office. Marcus turned to me. "All debts are being cleared," he intoned solemnly. "All claims are cancelled. We start the cycle again. Sure, there'll be winners and losers every time. But if you're a loser this time, you'll be a winner the next time. That's how it'll work. Anyway, think of all the services that have been offered and consumed now on the internet, essentially for free, because people can't be bothered to chase each other down and charge fees. And if I get a freebie from you, you eventually get a freebie from me, right? What you lose on the roundabouts, you get back on the swings." I was glad finally to get out of that temple of gloom and despair. We walked along a strangely deserted street. I must have looked pretty glum myself. Marcus suddenly stopped and put his arm around me. "Is it all too much for you?" he asked. "It's too much for a lot of people. Nervous breakdowns, suicides, fellas running amok at the office. We're seeing a spike in all them statistics. There was probably the same thing in Babel at the end. But never mind. That's the price of progress. And listen," he went on, suddenly more serious. "What I said about relationships when I met you first, well, I was really only pulling your leg. It's only computer disks that are wiped clean, not people's brains. There's no way to do that. Yet," he added ominously. "You mean we'll still know each other tomorrow?" I said hopefully. "We will," said Marcus, "and there's good luck between us." He patted me encouragingly on the back. "Mind you," he said, off on a new train of thought, "I wouldn't be optimistic about computer-based relationships. They'll all be gone without a trace tomorrow. That fella you got to know be email in a different time zone who used to help you out with software problems, he'll be history. And as for personal relationships, I mean friendships, even romantic relationships, well, they're all being done by social media now, aren't they? By tomorrow, those social media will be all wiped clean. They'll have to start afresh, building up their friends and likes and followers. All those dating profiles will be gone too. It'll be blind dates all around," he laughed. "I tell you, you'd be better off cruising the bars for a while." Marcus was clearly in the mood now for philosophic musings. "Relationships have got more and more superficial," he told me. "They're perfunctory, that's what they are. People move around all the time. They move from continent to continent. They live in parallel worlds, like you did in Canada and us here. Sure, people here have brothers and sisters in Australia that they never see. They don't know who their cousins are. They may have intensive relationships with people for a week or so, and then they're over. They're fleeting. Like when you sit together with someone on a transatlantic flight. Once you land, you forget each other by the time you clear customs. And marriage? Don't get me started. Sure, haven't we all sad stories to tell when it comes to that particular department? Serial monogamy is the new answer to marriage. It's just a fact that people get tired of each other. Doesn't it make sense to pull the plug every few years and start afresh? I nodded dumbly. So what man needs to do now is to learn to forget, said Marcus earnestly. Not to remember. Just let things go. And go with the flow. Live in the here and now. Yesterday is done and finished. Draw a line under it. And you know what, he went on, we'll be the better for it. Always making a new start. Tomorrow to fresh fields and pastures new, as the fella said. We walked further along the street in silence, our footfalls echoing against the silent facades of buildings. Marcus stopped at a corner and looked at his watch. It's well past midnight, begod, he said. I've done what I could. It's in the lap of the gods now. He looked at me earnestly, and then he grinned. Well, this is where we part company, Turlough. It was good to have you with me these last few hours. Goodbye and good luck. He shook me hand. Good luck, Marcus, I said. It was a good thing that I ran into you, wasn't it? Otherwise I'd wake up tomorrow morning and think I'd gone mad. He raised his hand in a final wave and disappeared into the shadows of the city buildings. After Marcus O'Brien left me to go home, I felt dazed and just wandered around the empty streets, keeping a sort of vigil at the cold start. I could imagine people busily working up to the last minute in all them office buildings, till the clock struck 4 and everything would be gone for good. Out beyond Harcourt Street, where there used to be a train station, now long disaffected, I found myself wandering in back streets in the moonlight. All the street lamps seemed to be gone out, and in the streets that I was wandering, it was as black as pitch. Only the bit of moonlight shining on the edges of the walls of ruined houses. Nobody lived in them old back streets anymore, it seemed. With nobody to hear but myself, I started to talk out loud. It was to cheer me up a bit too, as I was walking along. Them dark empty streets were enough to give you the pip. Do you know that? Might as well talk. Says I to myself, me monologue might be the last thing anybody will say on this earth tonight, before they're struck dumb by the onrushing cold start. If the truth were told, I just wanted to wake up out of this dream I seemed to be having. I was just walking around for something to do. If you didn't walk, you'd be standing there like a bloody pilgarlic. If you didn't talk, you'd be all on your own. I felt like the last man on the earth, wandering around like a ghost, talking with nobody listening. The talking was like walking, like it wasn't trying to walk anywhere. If I hadn't learned the habits of monologue, I wouldn't be able to stand the walking on my own. But that's how all the talk in the world's history will end up. One talker, one trying to cheer himself up, talking so it won't be so bloody quiet, walking until he's tired enough to sleep. And then there's going to be no more talk ever again, and the world will get a bit of peace. It's like as if I was saying nothing. This pitch black night swallowed up the talk, and me with it. There were so many old back streets with houses ruined, the roofs falling in, the windows boarded up. No lights, Nobody walked there. A bloody desert. Eventually, I could hear the clock striking 4. And I knew that the cold start had taken effect. The axe had fallen. The die was cast. I headed back to the centre of the city. I could see groups of people leaving offices, but not many. The rest must be lolling, numb and exhausted at their desks. The streets mostly seemed as deserted as you would expect in the small hours of the morning. I'd been wandering alone all night, and at the grey dawn I stood on the edge of O'Connell Bridge. There was a cold wind blowing down the Liffey as I stood there. It was just dawn. The city was still in darkness, but far off down the Liffey, out over the Irish Sea, there was light. I saw a man walking towards me. First I thought it was myself, reflected in an unseen mirror, but then I thought it was someone else, someone very like me. It was John Pringle, my old friend from Canada. I had no idea why, but he'd come over from Canada to see me. "Ah, John," says I. "John, you're looking well, and I'm glad to see you. What brings you to these parts?" "I missed you, so I thought I'd pay you a visit. Ever think of coming back?" "For sure," I said. "I'll be out to the west coast again soon enough. We'll spend some time together. And then I have a mind to go a bit further." "Which way will you go?" he asked with a smile. "Across and down the Pacific to New Zealand. I have a mind to visit me other uncle who lives there. It's the Antipodes, the opposite of here. The far side of the world from Dublin, where everything is upside down. That's why they call it Erewhon." "Erewhon?" "Aye, Erewhon. Nowhere backwards." "Well, we're somewhere, aren't we? Isn't this Dublin? I've travelled all this way, and now I'm not too sure. I feel hopelessly out of place." "Never mind," says I, with sudden resolution. "Dublin it is here and now. So will you come with me, and we'll take a ramble along the Liffey banks?" "I will," says he, and with that off we went along the granite quays on the right bank of the river, walking westwards. "Yeah, I have a mind to go back to Canada once more," I told him as we walked, "and then even on further to visit that old uncle of mine in New Zealand. When I was a chiseller, he sent me books from there, with pictures of strange birds they had there in the forest. The tui and the bellbird, and the kiwis walking along the forest floor. But the source of everything for me is still here. I want to find the source of what is Dublin. I want to find the source of the Liffey. And Olivia is the goddess that presides over Dublin. The source of the Liffey must be where she dwells. The source of everything. I don't mind telling you, I dreamed about that in Canada more than once. In me dreams, I actually went there." "Oh, and what was it like?" "It was hardly worth the visit," I said with a laugh, remembering. "I went up into the Dublin mountains. It was hard to see anything, because it was between light and dark, like it is now. I was following the Liffey, and it was harder and harder to follow as it shrank into a mountain stream. Finally, I stood on a little bridge near a mountain top and looked down into it. It was just a cold, dark trickle of water. Nothing much to look at. Then I turned around, looked over the other side of the little wooden bridge, and saw the source it was actually coming from. It was a little pool at a higher level, surrounded by rushes. But it was frozen over. On it I saw a couple of birds, a mixed group from North America and Europe, but they were all black. There was a jackdaw, one of them crows you see in Dublin all the time. There was a blackbird. It wasn't our singing blackbird here, but the blackbird you see in North America, which doesn't sing. There were others too, all black. What were they doing? They were pecking at the frozen surface of the pool. They seemed to be trying to break through the ice to get a drink or find some food to eat down there. But the ice was too thick for them. They all had a gleam in their yellow eyes that looked quietly resigned. They all looked terribly sad. And that was it? That was it. But now we're in Dublin, and we'll find that source if it's the last thing we do. We must have walked on winged feet, because we were at Kingsbridge in a short while, and soon we left the old granite quays behind, and we were walking along grassy banks with shady trees as the morning sun came up behind us. And BJ, we kept on going, till we left the city and were into the country, out past Lucan and the strawberry beds, and into the hills, still on winged feet. And oh, the joy of it! 'Cause now the river was a meandering stream, with the sun shining on it, and the water sparkled as it ran past the grassy banks, and I knew we were close to the source of the Liffey. A place I dreamed about, a place I thought I'd never see, a secret place, and we were there now. But it wasn't a trickle of a stream in the end. It wasn't a pool. It was vast. It seemed like an estuary rather than a source. The river branched out into several channels, and there were strips of land and islands covered in grass and reeds, with trees growing here and there too. The sun was up and shining on the rippling water all around. It was the springtime of the year, and everything was full of life, the birds singing and chirping and building their nests. As we walked out among the channels, we also saw water birds of all sorts. They had built their nests hard by the flowing water. There was curlew, lapwing and heron. I also saw mute swans, ducks, coots, water hens, the sort of birds I used to see at the pond near where I lived in Turlough when I was a boy. And now me and the bold John walked around among them, and I was pointing out to him the different birds and their nests, because I knew them all. At last we came to one that took my breath away, because brooding in the nest, as large as life, what should I see before our eyes but a kiwi? You have been listening to A Cold Start on the Source of the Liffey by Turlough Conmee, from Weird Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, until next time.